Bobcat reunited with her human after 7 years. What happens next will shock you. Deep in the Wisconsin wilderness, Maggie Larson thought her days of saving bobcats were behind her, until a chilling yowl broke the silence of a September night. It was Luna, the cub she'd raised and released 7 years ago, now a fierce mother, standing on Maggie's porch with a desperate plea. Her own cub was trapped, bleeding and near death, and Luna had traveled miles to find the one human she trusted. But saving this cub was just the beginning. What happens next will leave you stunned as Luna and her family return the favor in a way Maggie never saw coming. It was late September, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves, when that refuge trembled. Maggie was out by the lake, gathering cattails for a basket, her boots sinking into the muddy shore, when a sound stopped her, a low, rumbling growl, followed by a chuff she hadn't heard in years. She froze, her heart kicking hard, and turned toward the trees. There, emerging from the shadows, was a bobcat, sleek and spotted, her golden eyes glinting in the fading light, a faint scar across her muzzle. Maggie's breath caught. "Luna," she whispered, hardly daring to believe. 7 years ago she'd raised Luna from a cub, found orphaned in a storm, before releasing her to the wild. The bobcat tilted her head, chuffing again, and took a step closer, her gaze locked on Maggie's. "Lord above," Maggie said, her voice trembling as she set down her basket. Luna had been a tiny thing back then, mewling and shivering, her blue eyes barely open. Maggie had bottle-fed her, kept her warm through that brutal winter until she was strong enough to return to the forest. She'd thought that was the end. Luna, gone, a memory to cherish. But here she was, grown and fierce, standing on Maggie's land like a ghost come home. "How'd you find me, girl?" Maggie asked, her eyes stinging with tears. Luna chuffed again, a sound Maggie remembered from those long-ago nights, and sat, watching her with an intensity that felt like recognition. Maggie took a step forward, her heart pounding, unsure what this reunion meant. The woods held their breath, the lake still as glass, and Maggie knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. Maggie stood frozen by the lake, the cattails forgotten at her feet, as Luna's golden eyes bore into hers. The bobcat spotted. Coat gleamed in the twilight, her scar a jagged line across her muzzle, a mark from a tumble as a cub when she tried to climb Maggie's bookshelf and knocked over a lamp. "You haven't changed a bit," Maggie said, her voice soft, a smile tugging at her lips despite the tears in her eyes. Luna chuffed again, a low rumble that vibrated through the still air, and Maggie felt a flood of memories. Nights by the wood stove. Luna curled in her lap, her tiny paws batting at a ball of yarn. 7 years had passed, but the bond they'd forged in that winter felt as alive as ever. Maggie knelt slowly, her knees creaking, and extended a hand, palm up, the way she'd done when Luna was small. "Come on, girl," she coaxed, her voice steady despite the tremble in her chest. Luna sniffed the air, her ears flicking, then took a cautious step forward, her tail low. She stopped just out of reach, her gaze never leaving Maggie's, and chuffed again, a sound Maggie knew meant trust, not threat. "You remember me?" Maggie whispered, her throat tight. She didn't move closer. She knew Luna was wild now, a predator, not the cub she'd raised. But the bobcat's presence, her willingness to stay, spoke louder than words. That winter 7 years ago had been brutal, snow piling high, the wind howling through the pines, power flickering for days. Maggie had found Luna in a ditch near the lake, a tiny, shivering thing, her mother likely taken by a hunter or the storm. She'd brought her home, wrapped her in an old scarf, and fed her milk from a dropper, waking every few hours to keep her warm. "You were a fighter," Maggie said now, her voice thick with memory. Luna had grown fast, her blue eyes turning gold, her play turning rough, clawing at Maggie's curtains, pouncing on her boots. By spring, Maggie knew she couldn't keep her. She'd driven Luna deep into the forest, released her near a stream, and watched her vanish into the trees, her heart breaking even as she smiled. "Be free," she'd whispered then, thinking that was the end. Now Luna was back, and Maggie didn't know why. She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and Luna rose too, her movements fluid, powerful. "Let's get you some supper," Maggie said, half to herself, and started toward the cabin, glancing back to see if Luna would follow. The bobcat hesitated, then padded after her, keeping a few paces behind, her eyes scanning the woods. Inside, Maggie pulled a slab of venison from her icebox, leftovers from a deer her neighbor had shared, and set it on the porch. Luna approached, sniffed, and tore into it, her teeth flashing in the lantern light. "Still got an appetite," Maggie chuckled, sitting on the porch steps watching her eat. As Luna finished, she looked up, chuffing softly, and Maggie felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. But the night wasn't over. A rustle came from the trees, followed by a faint yowl, high-pitched, urgent. Luna's ears pricked, her body tensing, and Maggie's heart skipped. "What's that, girl?" she asked, standing, her lantern casting long shadows. Luna turned toward the sound, her tail flicking, and Maggie knew. Whatever had brought Luna back, it was just the beginning. The September night deepened around Maggie Larson's homestead, the air growing sharp with frost as the stars glittered. Above the pines, Luna sat on the porch, her golden eyes glinting in the lantern light, her spotted coat dusted with the first flakes of an early snow. Maggie stood beside her, the venison plate empty, her heart still racing from the reunion. The rustle in the trees came again, followed by that yowl, higher, more desperate, a sound that sent a shiver down Maggie's spine. "You brought trouble, didn't you?" she said, her voice a mix of worry and warmth, glancing at Luna. The bobcat's ears flicked, her body coiled like a spring, and she let out a low growl, her gaze fixed on the woods. Maggie grabbed her flashlight, its beam cutting through the dark, and stepped off the porch, Luna at her heels. "Let's see what's got you so riled," she muttered, her boots crunching on the frosted grass. The yowl led them past the lake, into a thicket of birch trees, their white bark ghostly in the moonlight. There, tangled in a mess of brambles, was a bobcat cub, no more than a few months old, its spotted fur matted with mud, its leg caught in a thorny vine, blood trickling from the scratches. It yowled again, a cry of pain and fear, and Luna chuffed, nudging Maggie's leg as if to say, "Help her." "Lord, Luna, is this yours?" Maggie asked, kneeling despite the ache in her joints, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The cub's eyes were gold like Luna's, its markings a mirror of her mother's. Maggie's heart clenched. She'd seen Luna grow from a cub just like this, and now here was another, needing her. She set the flashlight down, pulling her knife from her belt, and carefully cut the vines, the cub hissing weakly as she freed its leg. "Easy, little one," Maggie cooed, her voice soft, the same tone she'd used with Luna years ago. She scooped the cub up, its small body shivering against her, and wrapped it in her scarf, its warmth seeping into her hands. Luna watched, her chuff a mix of relief and urgency, and Maggie understood. This was why she'd come back. "You knew I'd help," she said, her eyes stinging as she stood, the cub cradled close. They walked back to the cabin, Luna padding beside her, her tail low but her stride steady. Inside, Maggie laid the cub by the wood stove, its glow warming. The small space and mixed milk with water, filling an old dropper. "Just like old times," she murmured, feeding the cub drop by drop, its tiny tongue lapping hungrily. Luna curled nearby, her eyes never leaving her offspring, a low purr rumbling in her chest. Maggie sat back watching them, her mind racing. Luna had survived 7 years in the wild, had a cub of her own, and somehow found her way back to the one human she trusted. "You're a mama now," Maggie said, her voice thick with pride. She named the cub Ember for the spark in her eyes, and knew she couldn't keep them, not forever. But for now they needed her, and Maggie wouldn't turn them away. Outside, the snow thickened, the wind whispering through the pines, and Maggie felt a purpose she hadn't known in years. "We'll get you strong," she told Ember, glancing at Luna. "Both of you. Winter settled over Pine Hollow, snow blanketing Maggie Larson's homestead in a quiet that felt both heavy and sacred. Inside her cabin, the wood stove crackled, casting a warm glow across the worn floorboards as Luna and Ember became a fixture. In Maggie's life once more, Luna roamed the space with a quiet grace, her spotted coat sleek, her scar a badge of survival, while Ember, now stronger, toddled after her, her gold eyes bright with curiosity. The cub's leg had healed, the scratches fading to faint lines, and she'd taken to pouncing on Maggie's socks, her tiny claws leaving pinpricks in the wool. "You're a handful, little spark," Maggie said, her voice warm with a wry edge, scooping Ember up to stop her from climbing the curtains. Maggie had settled into a rhythm with them, feeding Ember milk until she could handle meat, giving Luna venison from her stores, keeping the cabin warm against the biting cold. Luna was wilder now, her trust tempered by years in the forest, but she'd nudge Maggie's hand sometimes, a chuff rumbling in her chest, a gesture that felt like gratitude. "You're welcome, girl," Maggie would say, her hazel eyes soft, as she scratched Luna's ears, a liberty the bobcat allowed only her. Ember, though, was all play, chasing shadows, batting at Maggie's braid, her purrs filling the quiet nights. Maggie felt the years melt away, the loneliness that had settled after Tom's death lifting like morning mist. But Luna's visits to the woods grew longer. She'd slip out at dusk, her yowls echoing through the pines, and return at dawn, snow dusting her fur, her eyes sharp with a secret. Maggie knew she had a life out there, maybe more cubs, a territory to defend. "You're just borrowing me, ain't you?" Maggie said one morning, watching Luna groom Ember by the stove. The thought of letting them go again ached, but she knew it was coming. She called the local wildlife rehab center, a gruff voice answering, Clara, the director. "Got a bobcat and her cub here," Maggie explained, the phone crackling. "Raised. The mama years ago she came back," Clara sighed. "You're a soft touch, Maggie Larson. We'll take 'em come spring, but don't let 'em get too cozy." Spring came, the snow melting into mud, the lake sparkling under a warming sun. Luna and Ember were stronger, their play rougher. Ember pouncing on mice that dared enter the cabin, Luna teaching her to stalk with a predator's grace. Maggie built a small enclosure out back, wire and wood, to give them space. But Luna broke out one night, Ember trailing her, their tracks leading to the forest. Maggie found them by the lake, Luna with a fresh-killed rabbit, Ember mimicking her bite. "You're ready," Maggie said, her throat tight, and drove them to the rehab center the next day. Clara met her, peering into the crates. "They'll do fine," she said, nodding. Maggie drove home, the silence deafening, her heart heavy, but proud. That night Maggie sat on her porch, coffee in hand, the stars bright above. She thought that was the end. Luna and Ember gone, their chapter closed, but the wild has a way of surprising you, and Luna's story with Maggie was far from over. 7 months passed in Pine Hollow, the seasons turning from spring to a golden autumn, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Maggie Larson, now 63, moved slower, her hands stiffer from years of farm work, but her spirit held steady. Her homestead remained her sanctuary, chickens clucking in the yard, the garden yielding pumpkins and carrots, the lake murmuring at dusk. She'd settled back into solitude after releasing Luna and Ember, their absence a quiet ache she carried like a stone. "They're out there, living wild," she'd tell herself, hoeing the soil, her braids swinging with each stroke. But on still nights, she'd listen for Luna's chuff, a habit she couldn't break, though the forest stayed silent. It was late October, the leaves a blaze of red and orange, when the silence shattered. Maggie was in her barn, mending a fence, the lantern casting long shadows, when a growl stopped her cold, a low, familiar rumble, followed by a chuff. She turned, her heart leaping, and there was Luna standing in the doorway, her spotted coat gleaming, her scar stark in the light. "Luna girl," Maggie breathed, dropping her hammer, her eyes stinging with tears. But Luna wasn't alone. Behind her stood Ember, now grown, her gold eyes fierce, and beside her 2 more bobcats, larger, their coats thick with fall, their gazes wary but steady. "Your family," Maggie whispered, her voice breaking as Luna chuffed, stepping closer. Maggie knelt, her hands trembling, and Luna brushed against her, a purr rumbling deep in her chest. Ember followed, nudging Maggie's hand, while the other 2 hung back, their eyes glowing in the dark. "You brought 'em to meet me," Maggie said, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. She'd saved Luna once, raised Ember, and now here they were, a family whole and wild, come back to her. But the night held more. A crash came from the woods, metal on metal, followed by a man's shout. Maggie stood, grabbing her lantern, Luna's growl deepening as the bobcats turned toward the sound. It was a poacher, his truck stuck in a ditch near the lake, traps and rifles spilling from the bed. He cursed, spotting Maggie, his face hard. "Stay back, lady," he snarled, reaching for a gun. "I'm just taking what's mine." Maggie's blood ran cold. These were the kind of men who'd killed Luna's mother years ago. Before she could speak, Luna and her family moved. 4. Shadows darting through the dark, their snarls a primal chorus. They circled the man, claws flashing, teeth bared, driving him back to his truck. He fired a wild shot, the crack echoing, but the bobcats were faster, their growls a warning he couldn't ignore. He scrambled into the cab, engine roaring, and sped off, tires spinning in the mud. Maggie stood frozen, lantern trembling as Luna returned, her family at her side. "You protected me," she whispered, her voice thick with awe. They didn't stay. Luna chuffed a final time, Ember brushing against her leg, before they melted into the woods, their yowls fading into the night. Maggie sat on her porch that winter, reading Tom's old letters aloud, her voice carrying to the pines where Luna's family roamed, free but never far. She'd saved them, and they'd saved her. A bond that defied time. A favor returned in a way that shocked her to her core.